What if who you truly are hasn't yet been fully lived? Just pause with that thought. Let it settle, because for many of us, especially as the hair turns silver and the years gather behind us, there's a quiet whisper we've been trained to ignore. A whisper that says, "You are not done yet." Perhaps you felt it too, that strange sensation when the mirror reflects not just a face aged by time, but a presence that still longs to awaken. You look into your own eyes and wonder, have I truly met all of myself yet? Aging in the world's eyes often feels like a slow fading. The calendar pages fall like leaves, and we're told to settle, to shrink, to accept that the best has already been lived. But what if that story is not only incomplete? What if it's entirely wrong? In the Buddhist view, the self is never static. We are not marble statues set in stone. We are rivers, flowing, changing, revealing new currents even after long stretches of still water. And the journey inward, the path to becoming, doesn't end with age. If anything, it begins there. Because only when the noise fades can we begin to hear the voice beneath it all. Let me share a small story with you. There once was a man who, after decades of business and noise, finally retired to a simple countryside home. He told everyone he just wanted peace, to be left alone. But every morning he would sit on his porch, drink tea in silence, and feel an ache he could not name. One evening, an old monk passed by, paused, and asked him, "What are you doing with your stillness?" The man blinked, confused. The monk smiled and said, "Stillness is not the end of your story. It is the door to your beginning." That man spent the rest of his years not in withdrawal, but in discovery. He painted for the first time. He forgave his father after 40 years. He cried more often. He laughed louder. He became, at last, the person he had always carried quietly inside. And so I ask you, what if this stage of life, the one you're in right now, is not a closing chapter, but the blooming of a deeper self? We are not bound to the identities we've worn like uniforms. We are not sentenced to repeat the same thoughts, the same emotions, just because they've been familiar. No. There is a future calling to us, not in external achievements, but in the soft revolution of our inner world. A new self is not created in the outside world. It is remembered, uncovered, lived through the choices we make when no one is watching, through the emotions we choose to nurture, through the stories we allow to finally dissolve. So let's take a quiet step together into this reflection. Let's explore what it truly means to become at a time when the world thinks we should simply be done, because the truth is, the mirror is still offering you something, not just a reflection of who you were, but a window into who you can still become. Part 1. You are the architect of this life. There is a quiet kind of power that often goes unnoticed in this world. It doesn't shout, it doesn't demand, it doesn't wear a suit or speak from a stage. It whispers, usually when we are alone, when the television is off, the phone is silent, and the sunlight is spilling across the table with nowhere to be. It is the whisper that says, "You still have the pen. You can still write the next chapter." In the rush of our younger years, life often feels like a series of reactions. This happened, so I had to do that. This person hurt me, so I built a wall. This door closed, so I gave up and walked another path. We survive. We adapt. And somehow we forget that we were always meant to be more than just survivors. We were meant to be creators. There's an old Buddhist teaching that says, "With our thoughts, we make the world." It's easy to hear that and nod along. But do we truly understand its weight? Imagine just for a moment that everything you call your life, your moods, your daily rhythms, your relationships, even your aches and longings, is like a house. Not a house you stumbled into, but one you've been quietly building, brick by brick. every day, with your thoughts. Of course, many people will push back against that idea. I didn't choose the illnesses, they'll say. I didn't ask for the betrayals. I didn't build this loneliness. And they're right, in part. No one chooses pain, but what the Buddha pointed to wasn't blame, it was authorship. Life throws the storms, yes, but how we hold the umbrella, or whether we dance in the rain or shrink under it, that part is ours. That part is where creation begins. I once met an elderly woman at a small Dharma center in Northern California. She had lost her husband young, raised 3 children alone, and for decades worked at a job that drained her spirit. When she retired at 68, she said she felt like a shell of a person. I didn't know who I was without the struggle, she told me, her voice shaking like dry leaves in the wind. But instead of sinking into despair, she signed up for a beginner's meditation class. It was the first time I sat in silence and didn't feel guilty for it, she said. That small act changed everything. Over time, she began painting again, something she hadn't done since she was a girl. She volunteered at a local hospice, simply sitting with the dying, breathing with them, singing softly as they let go. She said, "I thought the best of me was long gone, but it turns out I hadn't even met her yet." What she discovered is something most sacred texts try to teach us, in metaphor after metaphor. The present moment is not the consequence of the past, it is the seed of the future. The moment we reclaim even one breath, one thought, one act of awareness, we return to the role of architect, not of buildings but of being. The Buddha taught that the mind is like a garden. If you do not intentionally plant flowers, weeds will grow on their own. So we must ask ourselves, what am I planting today? Doubt, regret, or perhaps compassion, joy, curiosity. Too often we think we are stuck in the life we've been handed. But truly the only prison is unconsciousness, living by default instead of design. And every breath, every moment of awareness, is a small chisel that reshapes the stone, even at 70, even at 90, especially then. Because maybe the real masterpiece of your life is not what you did in your career, or the titles you held, or the roles you played. Maybe the real masterpiece is who you become when the noise fades. When you realize you can still change your thoughts, you can still soften your heart, you can still reach for peace, not out there, but within, and that changes everything. So let this be the invitation, not to fix or strive or rush, but to remember that your soul was never finished being shaped, and the hands holding the chisel, they are yours. Part 2. Emotions are bridges, not chains. There is something tender, almost holy, about the way we feel. Not just the emotions we show to others, but the ones we carry quietly, the ones that sit with us in the still of morning, the ones that whisper through our chests before sleep. Emotions are not random bursts of mood or passing states of mind. They are bridges, delicate, powerful connectors between the inner world and the outer one. And yet, for so many of us, they have become chains. How many times have we been told, "Don't be so sensitive"? How often have we been made to feel ashamed of crying, or foolish for loving too deeply, or weak for admitting fear? Slowly, we start to believe that emotions are something to be hidden, managed, or suppressed. We treat them like wild dogs that must be kept on a leash. But the teachings of the Buddha offer us something far gentler, far wiser. In Buddhism, emotions are not enemies. They are visitors, messengers, teachers. The Buddha often spoke of mindfulness, of feeling Vadanasati, as a sacred practice. To truly be awake is to feel fully and yet not become enslaved by what is felt. Joy is welcome, so is sorrow. Even anger, when seen clearly, becomes a lantern showing us where something inside is calling out for care. I remember once attending a week-long silent retreat, and there was an older man, perhaps in his 70s, who broke down in tears during a walking meditation. He had been holding in grief for decades, grief over his brother's suicide, grief he was never allowed to speak of in his family, grief that had calcified in his chest like a stone. "I didn't cry at the funeral," he said, barely whispering. "I didn't even know how, but something changed when he simply allowed himself to feel, not analyze, not push away, just feel. The trembling, the heaviness, the ache behind the eyes. He didn't drown in the feeling. He floated through it." He told me later that grief wasn't destroying me. It was completing something inside me. That's the power of emotion when it is honored instead of suppressed. Modern science now confirms what Buddhist wisdom has always known. The body responds to emotions as if they were physical reality. When we feel gratitude, the heart rhythm smooths, the immune system strengthens, and healing chemicals surge through the bloodstream. When we feel chronic resentment or fear, the body locks itself into a state of emergency, always bracing, always preparing to flee or fight, never resting, never mending. And here's the most beautiful truth. The body cannot tell the difference between a real-life event and a vividly imagined one, as long as the emotion is felt deeply, which means you can actually give your body a taste of a peaceful, joyful, loving future right here, right now, by choosing to feel it. That's not imagination. That's transformation. So instead of waiting for joy to knock on your door, why not invite it in first? Instead of hoping peace will arrive when the world finally quiets down, why not cultivate it now, in the rhythm of your breath? Emotions, when seen clearly, become tools. A felt sense of compassion can dissolve years of bitterness. A few seconds of true, embodied gratitude can lift a day of dullness. And forgiveness, when sincerely felt, can loosen the knots that therapy, logic, or time could never quite untangle. But let us also be gentle. Some emotions will rise like summer wind. Others will come like thunder. They don't always ask permission, so we don't force them. We observe, we breathe, we feel, and slowly, gently, we learn to let the emotions flow through us, instead of build walls around them. Because in the end, emotions were never meant to bind us. They were meant to move us toward healing, toward presence, toward awakening. And when we befriend them, they stop being heavy chains pulling us down. They become bridges, leading us back to ourselves. Part 3. Let go of the victim story. Some stories are told out loud. Others live quietly in the folds of our minds, whispered again and again in the private language of the heart. And one of the most powerful, most enduring stories many of us unknowingly carry is the story of the victim. It begins innocently, with a hurt that was never mended, with a betrayal that shattered trust, with a moment when life pulled the rug out from under us and no one noticed we were falling. And so we told ourselves something to make sense of it. This happened to me. I had no choice. I am the way I am because of them, because of that. And in that telling, we carved a groove in the mind, a path we began to walk so often it became automatic. In Buddhism, this is called samskara, deep impressions in the mind, habits of thought that loop again and again until they become our identity. But here is what the Dharma also reminds us. Just because a story has been told 1,000 times doesn't mean it's the only story that can be told, or that it's even true anymore. There's an old Zen parable about two monks traveling together. They came to a river and saw a young woman struggling to cross. One monk, without hesitation, lifted her onto his back, carried her across, and gently set her down. Hours later, the other monk, clearly agitated, said, "Brother, we are forbidden to touch women. Why did you do that?" The first monk smiled and said, "I set her down hours ago. Are you still carrying her? How many things are we still carrying? Maybe your father left when you were young. Maybe your marriage ended with more silence than closure. Maybe your body has betrayed you in ways that feel deeply unfair. These things happened. They are real. But the question is, are you still carrying them? Are they still shaping your days, your relationships, your sense of possibility?" To be clear, letting go of the victim story does not mean denying the pain. It doesn't mean pretending the past didn't happen. It means choosing not to live from that pain anymore. Because the more we tell ourselves, "I am broken," the more we act like someone who is. The more we believe, "No one sees me," the more invisible we become. Our outer world begins to match our inner script. I once met a widower in his 80s who told me, "I've been angry at God for 30 years. His wife had died young, and he never remarried. He never painted again, though he had once been a gifted artist. I kept thinking, why would life take her and leave me?" he said, tears rising in his eyes. But after a single retreat in silence, after just sitting with that rage and grief, without judgment, without narrative, he said something remarkable. "I realized I wasn't mad at God. I was mad because I stopped loving after she died. I stopped living." I did that. It wasn't said with blame. It was said with awakening. The victim within him had held the reins for 3 decades. But now, something softer, wiser had stirred. He began painting again, just for himself. And for the first time in years, he spoke to his children not as the man clinging to the past, but as someone willing to create something new. In Buddhist psychology, there's the idea of reframing perception, not by denying reality, but by seeing with fresh eyes. The past can be the stone that sinks us, or the stone we step on to rise. The choice is never easy, but it is always possible. So ask yourself gently, what story am I living from? Is it a story of powerlessness or of possibility? Who would I be if I stopped telling the tale of what others did to me and started writing the story of what I can now do for myself? You see, liberation isn't always loud. Sometimes it's as simple as saying, "This pain shaped me, yes, but it no longer defines me." And in that moment, the victim steps aside and the creator takes the first step forward. Part 4. Your mind, your character, your world. There's a saying in the Dhammapada, one of the oldest collections of the Buddha's teachings, "All that we are is the result of what we have thought." The mind is everything. What we think, we become. At first glance, it may sound poetic, even abstract, but for those who pause long enough to reflect deeply, the truth in those words can be life-altering. Because what it implies, quietly but unmistakably, is this: your outer world is a reflection of your inner world, and who you are is being sculpted, moment by moment, by the thoughts you choose to entertain. Now that can feel empowering or overwhelming, because if you believe, as many do, that your character was shaped only by your past, by your parents, by your upbringing, by life's turns and traumas, then the idea that you can still change might feel foreign. And yet, haven't you already changed? You are not the same person you were at 20 or 40 or even last year. The voice in your head has shifted. Your priorities have evolved. Your thresholds for pain and joy have moved. So the real question isn't if you can change, it's how consciously you will do it now. In Buddhist thought, this is the path of bhavana, which literally means mental cultivation. Just as a gardener tends the earth, we tend the mind. We observe which thoughts strengthen kindness, which ones water resentment, which beliefs grow weeds of fear, and which allow blossoms of compassion to rise, and what we nurture grows. I once sat in on a Dharma circle with a retired school teacher named Ellen. She was in her late 60s, soft-spoken, polite to a fault. For years, she confessed, she had considered herself a nice woman, but not very brave. She had always avoided conflict, apologized first even when wronged, and lived under the fear of being too much. But something in her began to shift when she started paying attention to the quiet dialogue running through her mind. She noticed how often she thought, "I'm not strong enough," or "I should just stay quiet. They won't take me seriously." She said it was like catching a thief in her own house. So she made a vow, not loud, not dramatic, but sacred. Every time one of those old thoughts rose, she would gently replace it with a new one. My voice matters. I can sit with discomfort. This moment is a chance. Slowly, like a pot of water warming on a stove, her self-perception began to change, and with it, so did her behavior. She stood up to her son when he dismissed her needs. She started writing essays again, something she hadn't done since college. And one day she looked at the group and said, "I used to think I was just a passenger in life, but now I realize I was holding the wheel all along." This is what the Buddha meant when he spoke of right thought, not about forcing positive thinking, but about aligning your inner landscape with the kind of person you wish to become. Because how you think feeds how you act, and how you act feeds how you feel. And together, these form your character, your karma, not just the karma of consequences, but the karma of becoming. It's important to note that none of this is instant. The mind is sticky. It clings to its old ways like a well-worn path through a forest. But each time you catch yourself thinking from fear and gently pivot toward hope, each time you recognize an unkind belief and replace it with something more generous, you are carving a new trail. It may feel faint at first, but with every step, it grows clearer. So if you want to change your world, don't start with the circumstances around you. Start with the way you speak to yourself in the quiet spaces. Start with the thoughts you allow to settle into belief. Start with the garden of the mind, because your character, who you are when no one is looking, is not the result of chance or age or history. It is the living, breathing echo of your daily choices, and the world you walk through will mirror back what you most often rehearse within. Part 5. To become, you must transcend. Somewhere along the path of life, we're taught to settle into roles as if identity were a fixed destination rather than a river forever winding through new terrain. We're told, "You are this kind of person." Or perhaps we tell ourselves, "This is just how I've always been." And quietly, like ivy growing up the side of a house, those beliefs begin to cling. They become armor. They feel like safety. But in truth, they can become our most elegant prison. To truly become, to grow, to awaken, to step into the version of ourselves we've long felt pulsing beneath the surface, we must be willing to transcend the very things we once used to survive. And that, my friend, is no small ask. In Buddhist thought, transformation is not about self-improvement in the way the world sees it, more accomplishments, more self-discipline, more polish. It's about letting go of the delusions that keep us from our true nature. The ego, the old wounds, the identity clung to like a shield. These are the illusions we must lovingly loosen. There is a story told in many Zen traditions about a young monk who longed for enlightenment. Every day, he would meditate, fast, chant, and study. Yet still, he felt stuck. So he climbed a mountain to seek out an old teacher known for his clarity. The teacher served him tea, saying nothing for a long while. Then finally, the master said, "You must empty your cup." The young monk, confused, replied, "But I came to be filled with wisdom." And the master smiled, "Exactly. But your cup is already full of ideas, of ambition, of who you think you are. How can anything new come in unless you make space? To transcend is to empty the cup, not of memory, not of meaning, but of identity that no longer serves, the small self that clings to titles, habits, grudges, and fears. And in doing so, you open a space, a sacred one, where something truer can emerge. I once spoke with a man in his 70s who had spent 4 decades in corporate America. He had been respected, wealthy, always in control. But in retirement, he felt like a ghost in his own skin. "I don't know who I am without the title," he told me, eyes downcast. So I asked, "What part of you has always been there, even before the job?" He thought for a long time. Then, almost shyly, he said, "I used to love fixing old radios. I loved the quiet, the attention to detail, the feeling of bringing something broken back to life." I smiled and said, "Maybe that's not just what you did. Maybe that's who you are." That man went on to volunteer at a community center, teaching teens how to repair old electronics. He didn't just find a hobby. He rediscovered a part of himself that had been buried under years of identity armor. He transcended what the world once said he had to be and became something beautifully whole. In Buddhist teaching, this is the heart of anatta, the non-self. It does not mean we are empty or meaningless. It means we are not fixed, we are fluid, and therefore we are free. Free to change, free to grow, free to leave behind what no longer reflects the truth of who we are becoming. But the act of transcendence rarely feels graceful. It is often messy. It requires discomfort. You may feel like a tree in winter, stripped bare, uncertain if spring will ever come. But remember, the blooming is always preceded by the letting go. So, if you feel like a stranger to yourself lately, take heart. That's often the first sign that something within is unfolding, that your spirit is outgrowing the confines of old definitions, that you are being asked, not by the world but by your own soul, to stretch, to soften, to step beyond. And in doing so, not only do you become more fully yourself, you become something no title, no history, no fear could ever contain. Part 6. Remembering the future. At first, it sounds like a riddle. Remember the future. How can we remember what hasn't happened yet? How can we call to mind an experience that lies ahead of us in time? And yet, from both ancient Buddhist insight and modern contemplative science, there is a deep truth hidden in this paradox, one that can unlock doors we didn't even realize we'd locked behind us. To remember the future isn't about predicting outcomes. It's about embodying the feeling of the life we long to live, now, before the evidence arrives. It is about aligning the body, the breath, the mind, and the heart with the energy of who we're becoming, not who we've been. And in that alignment, something subtle but extraordinary happens. The future no longer feels far away. It begins to arrive, piece by piece, within us. In Buddhist practice, particularly within visualization meditations, there is a sacred space where imagination and presence meet. You sit in silence, you breathe, and then you begin to conjure, not fantasy but intention. You visualize yourself not as you were in the past, not even as you are now, but as the version of you that is whole, awakened, and deeply at peace. You picture her walking through her day. You feel his breath, calm, open, steady. You watch the way your future self moves through difficulty with compassion, how they speak with clarity, how they radiate a quiet joy, not dependent on circumstance. And as you sit with that image, not for minutes but for days, weeks, months, that future begins to imprint itself upon your body and mind. It becomes familiar. And when something becomes familiar, it becomes possible. I once met a woman in her mid-70s who, after surviving an emotionally abusive marriage, had resigned herself to a quiet, lonely retirement. She told me, "I've made peace with being invisible," but her eyes, even as she said it, shimmered with a kind of restrained longing. So I asked her, gently, "Can you imagine being seen, not by others, but by yourself?" She laughed. "It's been so long, I wouldn't know where to start." So we began simply. Each morning, she would sit for 10 minutes, breathing slowly, picturing herself as a woman who felt radiant, who danced in her kitchen, who smiled when she passed a mirror, who no longer apologized for existing. It felt silly at first, even painful, but little by little, something softened in her. One day she joined a dance class for seniors. The next she let her hair grow silver and stopped dyeing it. Months later, she sent me a letter that read, "I didn't know you could fall in love with the woman you're still becoming." What she did, whether she realized it or not, was remember her future. She stopped living from the echoes of her past and started rehearsing her potential. And in doing so, she opened the door for her life to meet her where she was waiting. In neuroscience, this is known as neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to rewire itself based on repeated thought and emotion. In Dharma, we call it intentional becoming. Different names, same truth. The future is not something we wait for, it is something we prepare for, emotionally, energetically, spiritually. But here's the key. If you want to remember the future, you must feel it. You must bring the body into the vision. Thought alone will not carry you there. It is the sensation of joy, the pulse of calm, the breath of freedom, as if it were already real, that creates the conditions for it to emerge. So ask yourself, what does peace feel like in your body? What would gratitude taste like in your chest? If tomorrow you woke up with everything you've ever hoped to become, sit with that, not once, but again and again, until the future stops feeling like an idea and starts feeling like home. Because when you learn to remember the future with your whole being, you stop chasing life, and life begins, softly and steadily, to meet you where you already are. Part 7. Discomfort is the doorway to growth. There is a quiet truth we rarely hear in a world that constantly sells ease and comfort. Discomfort is not the enemy, it is the invitation. And yet how many of us have spent years, even decades, arranging our lives to avoid discomfort? We retire to quieter homes, repeat the same safe routines, avoid conversations that might stir up old wounds. We do it not because we are lazy or weak, but because somewhere deep down we were taught that pain meant something was wrong. That struggle should be minimized. That growth should be gentle and tidy and quick. But any gardener will tell you, nothing blossoms without first breaking through the soil. Buddhist teachings are clear about this. Dukkha, often translated as suffering, but more accurately as discomfort or unsatisfactoriness, is not only part of life, it is the very teacher that points the way to liberation. The crack in the shell is not the end of the egg, it is the beginning of the bird. I remember a man named Thomas who came to a weekend retreat with his daughter. He was a tall, proud man in his early 60s, with a quiet presence that carried both strength and hesitation. He had been raised in a family where emotions were private, and challenges were never spoken aloud. "We handled things," he said. "You didn't talk about fear. You just pushed through it. But in recent years, he had begun to feel hollow, not broken, just dulled, as if something vibrant inside him had been wrapped in wool. He came to the retreat, not because he was searching for enlightenment, but because he was tired of feeling nothing. On the second day, during a silent walking meditation in the woods, something in him gave way. The slow steps, the breath syncing with the rhythm of trees, the presence of others who were also simply being, it cracked through his armor. He wept, not loudly, not dramatically, but the way a river seeps from stones that have held it in too long. When we spoke later, he said, "I think I mistook being numb for being strong." That right there is the moment of growth. Not when everything feels good, but when we allow ourselves to feel, period. When we stop resisting the discomfort of vulnerability or confusion or sorrow, and instead greet it as part of the sacred unfolding of becoming. In Buddhist practice, discomfort is often a signal that something in us is waking up. The ache in the legs during long sitting isn't just physical, it's the body's resistance to stillness. The restlessness in the mind isn't a problem, it's the surface breaking open so deeper truths can rise. And in life, the hard conversations, the unfamiliar choices, the new ways of being, they're not just challenges, they're thresholds. But here's the delicate part. Not all discomfort leads to growth, only the kind we meet with awareness. When we numb it, deny it, escape it, we stay stuck. But when we pause and say, I see you, what are you here to teach me? We transform it, like heat applied to metal. The very pressure shapes us. There's a reason the lotus is such a revered symbol in Buddhism. It rises from the mud, through murky water, into the open air to bloom. It does not resent the mud, it uses it. It stretches toward light, not in spite of where it began, but because of it. So too for us. The discomfort you feel when you try something new, when you speak your truth, when you sit with sadness instead of escaping it, that discomfort is not a mistake. It is not weakness. It is the cost of awakening. It is the fire through which the dross burns away, and the gold within you begins to shine. So the next time you feel uneasy in your chest, uncertain in your step, or shaken by the weight of change, pause, breathe, listen, ask what in me is trying to grow, and then with tenderness and courage, walk through that door, because discomfort is not the end of the road. It is the beginning of becoming. Part 8. Wealth of the heart, not the hand. In a world that measures success by bank balances and property lines, the idea that true wealth might live elsewhere within, not without, can seem quaint at best and foolish at worst. But when we look with the eyes of the Dharma, with the wisdom of those who've sat in silence long enough to hear the heartbeat of truth, we begin to see the richest lives are not necessarily the ones adorned with gold, but the ones nourished by grace. The Buddha himself left behind a kingdom, not out of disdain for material comfort, but because he recognized that the deepest hunger cannot be satisfied by what the world provides. And so he walked barefoot, bowl in hand, robe on back, an image that still unsettles modern minds because it challenges everything we're conditioned to believe about value and fulfillment. But let me tell you a story, one that has stayed with me for years. There was a woman named Maria, a widow living on a modest pension in a small California town. Her home was humble, her belongings few. But every Thursday, without fail, she would bake 3 loaves of fresh bread, one for herself, one for a neighbor down the street who lived alone, and one for a woman at the shelter who reminded her of her younger sister. When asked why, she smiled and said, "Because when I need the dough, I remember I still have something to give." That, to me, is wealth. You see, wealth of the heart is not about how much you have. It's about how much flows through you. Compassion, presence, generosity. These are currencies that do not diminish with giving. They multiply. A person can have very little and yet feed the world with their kindness. Another can have more than enough and still starve in spirit. In Buddhist teachings, there is the concept of dana, the practice of giving. But dana is not just charity. It's a sacred recognition that we are all part of the same ocean, and to share what we have is to keep the water flowing, not out of obligation, but out of joyful understanding that hoarding, whether it's money, love, or time, only creates stagnation. Flow is life. And so perhaps the question is not, what do I have, but what am I willing to offer? A kind word, an open ear, a garden full of tomatoes shared with a neighbor. These acts, though small, ripple outward in ways we cannot measure. They nourish the soil of the soul, ours and others. Now, it's not wrong to seek financial stability. It's human to want security, to wish for freedom from worry. But trouble begins when money becomes the end rather than the means. When we forget that what we own is not who we are, that beyond the numbers and the savings accounts, there is a deeper kind of abundance waiting to be remembered. I've sat with men who built empires and confessed, late in life, that they didn't know how to enjoy a sunset. I've met women with little more than a patch of earth to call their own, who wept at the beauty of rain hitting the leaves. Who is the wealthier soul? One of the Buddha's lesser-known teachings says, contentment is the greatest wealth, not because it asks us to lower our standards, but because it invites us to stop postponing joy until life meets our terms. So, dear one, ask yourself gently, what is enough? What fills your chest when you wake? Not what fills your drawers. When was the last time you felt rich? Not in assets, but in aliveness. Because the world will always measure you by what you possess. But the heart measures something else entirely. Your willingness to live with open hands, open eyes, and a spirit that says, what I have is meant to be shared. And in that kind of giving, in that quiet overflowing, you just may find the truest wealth there is. Part 9. Heal the heart, and the body follows. There's a moment in every aging journey, quiet and often unnoticed, when we begin to realize that the aches in our body are not just physical, that fatigue is not always from effort, but sometimes from carrying pain that was never allowed to breathe, and that some illnesses do not begin in the skin or the bones, but in the heart that has been too long denied its right to feel and release. Modern science, in its growing humility, is beginning to catch up to what Buddhist wisdom has long taught. The body and the mind are not two. They are deeply, intimately, indivisibly one. What the heart suppresses, the body stores. What the mind repeats, the nervous system memorizes. And what the soul tries to forget, the cells often remember. We don't always notice it at first. A tightness in the chest here, a shallow breath there, a recurring tension in the shoulders, an upset stomach that no medicine seems to soothe. We treat the symptoms, we change the pillow, take the supplement, apply the cream. But the root, often it lies in a place no scalpel can reach. Unspoken grief, buried anger, inherited fear. The Buddha never separated physical healing from spiritual healing. He taught that suffering arises when we resist what is present, and that includes the emotions we've been taught to swallow whole. Anger, when denied, becomes inflammation. Fear, when chronic, weakens immunity. Loneliness, when prolonged, is not just a sadness of the spirit. It shortens breath, disrupts sleep, and slowly wears at the heart itself. I once knew a man named Reggie, a Vietnam veteran who had spent decades with a diagnosis of PTSD and heart disease. No therapy seemed to help. No medication truly touched the deeper ache. It wasn't until he was invited to attend a silent mindfulness retreat, almost reluctantly, that something began to shift. For the first 2 days, he said nothing. He sat stiff, arms crossed, the pain in his chest tight as a drum. But on the 3rd day, during a compassion meditation, tears streamed down his face. "I've been holding my breath for 45 years, he whispered, and I didn't even know it. It was the beginning, not of a miracle, but of a return. A return to the body, not as a battleground, but as a temple, a place worthy of tenderness, a home where sorrow could be witnessed, not silenced." After that retreat, Reggie continued practicing. His heart symptoms didn't vanish overnight, but his blood pressure dropped. He slept more deeply. His digestion improved. He began laughing again, something his wife said she hadn't seen in years. It was like his soul stopped holding its breath. She said, "That, my dear listener, is the quiet medicine of mindfulness, of letting the heart speak so the body can breathe, of feeling what hurts so the cells no longer have to carry the weight in silence." In Buddhist teachings, the breath is not just oxygen, it is presence. When we bring breath to where it hurts, to the grief in the chest, the shame in the belly, the tightness in the throat, we are saying to the body, "I am here now. You are not alone. You don't have to hold this forever." And the body, so loyal, begins to relax, to trust, to soften its armor. We spend so many years learning to survive, to push through, to hold it together. But healing asks for something else. It asks us to feel, to release, to come home to ourselves without judgment. So let me offer you this. Perhaps your body is not failing you. Perhaps it is simply speaking the language of your past, asking to be heard, held, healed. And perhaps by softening your heart, by forgiving yourself, by honoring your sadness, by allowing your emotions to rise and fall like the breath, you will begin to feel what true healing is, not fixing, but remembering wholeness. Because when the heart is healed, the body often remembers how to follow. Part 10. What you model, you multiply. There's a quiet truth, often overlooked, that slips into the corners of our lives and takes root. We teach not by what we say, but by who we are. Words matter, yes, but energy, presence, and embodiment, they speak louder, louder than advice, louder than intention, louder than even love, when love is not lived. In Buddhist psychology, this principle is woven deeply into the fabric of interdependence. We are not isolated islands. We ripple, we reflect, we imprint. The way we breathe, the way we listen, the way we show up in a room, it is absorbed by those around us, often without a single word being exchanged. And nowhere is this truth more tender and more powerful than in the relationships we hold closest with our children, our partners, our communities, and yes, with our own aging selves. You see, our nervous systems are not sealed shut. They are porous. And for those of us who are elders, who have walked this earth long enough to carry both joy and scars in equal measure, we are quietly becoming mirrors. Mirrors in which others, especially the young, glimpse what might be possible or what might be feared. I once sat with a grandmother named Shirley, who shared something deeply moving. Her granddaughter had just turned 10, and during a visit one weekend, the little girl asked, "Grandma, how come you always look calm even when you're sad?" Shirley laughed gently and said, "I don't know, honey. Maybe I've had a lot of practice." But later she admitted to me that this question stirred her deeply. "I didn't realize she was watching so closely," she said. "I thought I was just trying to get through the day. But apparently, I was teaching her something." Indeed she was, because presence teaches, integrity teaches. The ability to sit with discomfort without lashing out, to speak gently when frustrated, to admit fear without collapsing into it. These are the teachings that shape lives. These are the living Dharma, passed not through lectures or books, but through behavior witnessed and absorbed. In neuroscience, they call it mirror neurons. In Buddhism, we simply call it karma. Not punishment, not fate, but the ripple effect of action. And every time we choose to pause before reacting, to listen before judging, to forgive before hardening, something shifts, not just in us, but in everyone who walks beside us. You may not see it immediately. The teenager who rolls their eyes, the partner who seems distant, the neighbor who never says thank you. But trust me, your presence plants seeds. Seeds that grow silently. Seeds that someday will blossom when they're ready. Maybe in the smile of a child who remembers how you hugged them gently after they failed. Maybe in the way a friend remembers how you didn't panic when everything went wrong. And so the question becomes, what do I want to multiply? If I model fear, I multiply fear. If I model harshness, I multiply shame. But if I model compassion, not just for others but for myself, I multiply the possibility of healing, of courage, of peace. In the Buddhist tradition, the bodhisattva is not a perfect being. The bodhisattva is simply one who walks the path with the sincere wish that their steps will ease the suffering of others. And each of us, in our quiet ways, can take that vow. We can walk through our days as if every moment is a lesson we are gently offering the world. Here is how I sit with sorrow. Here is how I hold joy without clinging. Here is how I return to the breath when I've been pulled too far. So let us not underestimate the sacredness of our presence. Let us not believe the myth that our influence wanes with age. On the contrary, age ripens influence. It deepens it, because the life we've lived becomes the ground upon which others will dare to stand. You don't need to preach. You don't need to be perfect. You only need to be true. Because when you live your truth with gentleness and courage, you're not just shaping your own path, you're lighting the way for others to find theirs. Conclusion: you are already becoming. You are not who you were yesterday. And whether you notice it or not, that alone is a quiet, sacred blessing. As we've journeyed together through these reflections, perhaps a soft truth has begun to rise in you, that you are not fixed. You are not finished. You are not the sum of your regrets, your habits, or even your past. You are right now in the unfolding, becoming, word by word, breath by breath, the person your future quietly longs to meet. We've spoken of the mind as a garden where your thoughts take root and shape the landscape of your reality. We've looked at emotions not as enemies but as bridges, pathways to healing and deeper awareness. We've explored the importance of shedding old identities, of visualizing the life you wish to live as if it is already within reach, and how true growth begins, not in ease but in discomfort. We reminded ourselves that the richest form of wealth is not stored in bank accounts, but in the heart that knows how to give freely. And we honored the profound truth that healing the heart is the first step in allowing the body to remember its natural rhythm of wholeness. Lastly, we arrived at the realization that what we embody, moment to moment, is what we teach, what we ripple, what we multiply in the world. And so now, dear soul, I invite you to pause, to ask yourself, not with judgment, but with compassion, what kind of person am I becoming? Not by force, not by trying to be someone else, but by gently returning again and again to the self that feels most like home. You see, becoming isn't about becoming better. It's about becoming truer, more aligned with your deepest peace, more at home in your own presence, more available to the beauty that has always waited patiently for you to notice it. So tomorrow morning, as you rise and the light touches your window, take a moment, place your hand on your heart, and remember, you are allowed to begin again. Not because something is wrong, but because something beautiful is still unfolding in you. And if today's journey touched something inside you, something soft, something stirring, consider joining us again. Subscribe to this channel, share this space with someone you love. Let's continue walking this path together, gently and with presence. And now I leave you with this blessing. May the person you are becoming greet you with kindness each morning. May your past rest quietly behind you, and may your future rise, not in haste, but in peace, in clarity, and in joy. Until next time, walk gently.